This week is a failed presidential candidate nobody's asked for, but I'm doing him anyway. The man who killed the Corvair and impaled the 2000 presidential election. Get it? Because Al Gore was running. Gore, impale. Don't lie, I know you're all here for my dad jokes. Mr. Ralph Nader. Ralph was born February 27th, 1934 in Winstead, Connecticut to Lebanese immigrants. Ralph's dad, Nathra, eventually became a restaurant owner, and Ralph had a pretty middle-class upbringing. Ralph was pretty good in school and got offered a scholarship to Princeton, but his father made him decline the scholarship on the grounds that the family could afford his tuition and it should go to somebody more in need. So doing the right thing was apparently a family tradition from early on. Ralph graduated magna cum laude from Princeton and then went on to Harvard Law. And at Harvard, Ralph would often get bored and skip classes to go hitchhiking across the country, searching out issues facing Native Americans and migrant workers. And despite his incredibly wholesome chronic truancy, he still managed to graduate from Harvard in 1958. After Harvard, he practiced law for a while, lectured at Hartford, and traveled to the Soviet Union, Chile, Cuba, doing correspondence work for the Christian Science Monitor and The Nation. The magazine, not like the country. Then in 1965, the man wrote a book that would put him on the forefront of consumer and political activism and make him universally hated by car guys everywhere. Unsafe at Any Speed was a critical expose on the U.S. automotive industry doing shitty capitalist stuff at the expense of the safety of the American consumer. Now, this was supposed to be critical of an entire industry, but people have a very narrow lane of focus. And since most of his research was focused on General Motors, and specifically a safety issue on one of their pretty revolutionary models that they had at the time, the Corvair, that's what most people took away from the book. You know, Corvair bad. And now, I'm definitely not going to defend what General Motors did because they definitely covered up safety shit, and then when they were outed by Ralph, they tapped his phones and followed him around trying to dig up dirt on him to discredit him. It was fucked up. But I think him zeroing in on the Corvair specifically really did a disservice to automotive technology and advancement. The car was a product of almost a decade of research and development, and it was really pushing the boundaries of automotive technology in ways that wouldn't have even been possible a few years before, and it was doing it in an affordable fashion for the mass market. And with any new slate technology, it's definitely going to have some bumps in the road, which was quite literally what was going on with the Corvair, which made it easy for Nader to exploit General Motors and the specific issues with that car to prove his point, but I think it also made manufacturers way more conservative with their R&D and implementing new technology and set the whole automotive industry back decades. That said, Nader in that book is pretty much directly responsible for the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act, so props to him for that. This newfound notoriety from culling the Corvair directly dovetailed into Nader getting a bunch of law students together to volunteer to investigate the Federal Trade Commission. The results of the hard work of Nader's raiders eventually got Nixon to overhaul the FTC, and they started putting a lot more effort into enforcing antitrust and consumer protection laws. After that, he founded a watchdog group called Public Citizen to engage the public in activism and lobbying for consumer protections. Then in the 1970s, he pivoted from consumer protection to environmental activism, and did the same fucking thing all over again that he did with the Corvair, creating the Critical Mass Energy Project, which would become the largest anti-nuclear power activism group in the United States. And once again, yes, there was some shitty capitalist stuff going on with nuclear energy at the time. But like the Corvair, where it wasn't specifically a problem with a car, we didn't have a problem with nuclear energy, we had a problem with shitty rich people doing shitty rich people things. Once again, people have a very narrow field of focus. So instead of stopping shitty rich people from doing shitty rich people things, we just slammed the brakes on a technology we could really use right now as the world is literally burning. And in what seems to be a somewhat common theme in Ralph Nader's life, his efforts to help really ended up hurting us all in the big picture. That said, Ralph also did do a lot of great stuff that helped everyone indefinitely. His work helped get the Clean Water Act and the Freedom of Information Act and the Whistleblower Protection Act passed, the Consumer Product Safety Act, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You know, he did a lot of good stuff. He also went after Microsoft for being a monopoly, which they absolutely were in the 90s. So credit where it's due. We owe a lot of the protective legislation we enjoy today to Ralph Nader. And then we get to the point of this video. Sorry, I can be long-winded. Despite saying in 1980 that he would never run for president, in 1992, Ralph started running for president like it was his fucking hobby. He ran in every single presidential election from 1992 to 2008, from the Independent Party to the Green Party to the Vermont Progressive Party to fucking half a dozen other obscure third parties. He never really put up a notable performance, and I don't think that he was running with the intention of winning the White House, and more just with the intention of bringing attention to his issues. However, there is one election he managed to nader the shit out of again. The 2000 election between the former future president of the United States and Baby Bush. For those of you who don't remember, Al Gore won the popular vote, and this entire election came down to the state of Florida. 537 votes in the state of Florida. Anybody who's heard of Florida knows that if we leave anything up to Florida, it's going to come with the worst possible outcome. And there was a ton of sketchy shit. The governor of Florida, Jeb, was George Bush's brother. They had a bunch of really sketchy voting machine malfunctions, and then a bunch of hand counting problems to recount the voting machines that malfunctioned. Then the Supreme Court basically halted counting when it was in George Bush's favor. There was all kinds of fuckery afoot. Fuckery unintentionally made possible by Ralph Nader, because Nader received over 97,000 votes in Florida in the 2000 election. And according to a Harvard study and common fucking sense, the majority of Nader voters would have voted for Gore had Nader not been an option. Now, Bush won Florida by 537 votes. In presidential election terms, 537 votes is quite literally 0%. If 0.5% of Nader's voters had voted for Gore, and we can probably pretty conservatively bet that at least 50% of his voters would have voted for Gore had Nader not been on the ballot. But all the world needed was 0.5%, and we all would not have been stuck with the fucking decider. If it wasn't for Nader, we would have never had any, don't fool me. We would have never known that the French didn't have a word for entrepreneur. God, think of all the money the taxpayers would have saved by not having that mission accomplished banner. We probably would have been paying Halliburton a lot less to blow up fewer brown kids. Climate policy would have been at least 8 years further along. We wouldn't have been subjected to Dick Cheney scowling at us. It is just genuinely hard for me to wrap my head around the negative global impact one man had as a result of his lifelong quest to do the right thing and make the world a better place. Like, the dude is a great man, and he's done so much good for the world. And yet, I hate to say it, but I truly believe the world is a substantially worse place because of all the good he was trying to do. And I think this is because he sees specific problems as isolated things and goes for specific solutions like a dog on a bone. And he never stops to consider the bigger picture of where that problem fits into and the consequences of the route he's going to address it. And so as much as I want to love Ralph Nader, and I do love a lot of what he's done for the world, and I genuinely believe that he is a good man, I just can't get past the consequences of his actions that the entire world has had to endure. So if the road to hell is truly paved with good intentions, then AC/DC has a great song about Ralph Nader Memorial Highway.